In this video, I want to make a point about how we think and how it really happens at two levels. Conscious, rational decision making, what we're doing right now, talking to each other with words, and unconscious decision making, kinds of things that has led to support of this new field, neuroeconomics, for example, where we look in your brain while you make decisions about whether to purchase something and try to figure out how you actually make that decision, as opposed to perhaps how you say you make the decision. Now, this rests on a couple of fundamental principles. The first one is the idea that the brain has got all these units to it that we discussed in the last chapter, in chapter 2. One of the biggest divisions which applies to consciousness is the left versus the right hemisphere, which was the subject of the previous video. In chapter 4, which is on states of consciousness, we talk about very important things that happen, such as sleep and dreaming, drug-induced alterations in consciousness, and maybe things like meditation and other altered states. We're going to cover most of those in lecture on Wednesday, but what I want to do now is to try to make one single point. And that point is actually a bit in the video that we had associated with chapter 2, video 2.3, where you were asked to look at a section of a larger talk that I gave, which involved this concept of 3 levels of function of the brain. To reiterate a little bit, the lowest level function we sort of set aside because it has something to do just with how we move around, and we're going to just presume that. The highest level function is the conscious, rational thinking I talked about, but below that is the middle level. And that level is where we make a lot of unconscious decisions. Now, in that video, I linked it to education and even tolerance, if you watch the whole thing. And we can do a little bit of that in class. But what I want to do here is just mention that the triune brain notion, of which levels 2 and 3 are the most important, is the topic of this video. To give you a visual image of the triune brain, here's a figure taken from last Wednesday's lecture, and it also appeared in the video from last week, 2.3. And again, you notice the 3 levels of function. And it's easy to imagine how the reptilian brain was first and then built around it a mammalian brain, and that then built around it a primate brain. So that in a sense, if we go back and look at ourselves at an earlier period in time, we're functioning more at the mammalian level. And if we go back to animals that are earlier in evolution, haven't developed a primate brain, their function tends to be more at the mammalian level. Sometimes we call this emotional functioning, but it's really very logical, and it helps to do adaptive things. In us, it helps to fuel things like decisions, even decisions that might involve bias, for example. Perhaps something that we might not even be aware of. If you think these things haven't made it into the popular press, take a look at the following 2 books chosen from Amazon.com, and maybe someday you want to take a look at them. This book, published in 2010, looks at a variety of cases from a journalist perspective of where people made mistakes in judgment in popular press, in court hearings, etc., and points out that there's often an implicit bias that we bring to a situation about which we do not know. I'll say more about that later. This book has got the title Incognito and suggests that there's much about our brain function that we don't know. And this is part of what underlies neuroeconomics. Do we really have 2 states of consciousness, one of which we're aware, one of which we're unaware? I don't know. But I think this topic deserves discussion, along with sleep and drug-altered consciousness and meditation. And we will certainly do this on Wednesday when we meet after you look at this video. Thank you.